So this week we are looking at chapter 15, these cultural transformations, religion and science from 1450 to 1750. And I'm just going to briefly kind of give you the highlights of the chapter. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of it because that's what you do, right? You're going to read the chapter and do the assignments and get a deeper understanding of the information in there. So here, just kind of to open it for you, when we think about missionaries today, many people picture Europeans traveling to Africa or Latin America. But today, some of the most active Christian missionaries come from Africa, traveling to Europe and North America. And that reversal really tells us something important. Between 1450 and 1750, religion did not simply spread outward from Europe unchanged. Instead, religion is going to move, it's going to adapt, it's going to blend, and sometimes it's going to spark conflict. And at the same time, Europeans began developing a new way of understanding the natural world, one that was rooted in observation and evidence. We now call it modern science. So what I want to do is just briefly explore how religion became global, how belief systems adapted outside of Europe, and why Europe, but not the rest of the world, experienced the scientific revolution. So here are the chapter learning objectives for you. So we're going to look at those tensions between religion and science. We're going to analyze the causes and consequences of the Protestant Reformation, compare how Christianity spread in Spanish America and in China. We'll identify examples of religious syncretism in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. We are also going to explain why the scientific revolution occurred primarily in Europe, and evaluate how science reshaped global societies, both in a good way and in a bad way. So let's look at the globalization of Christianity. So you have to keep in mind, Christianity was not global in the year 1500. It was largely confined to Europe, and it did stretch from the Iberian Peninsula. Think back, we looked at that. That's like Portugal, Spain, all the way over to Russia. There are small Christian communities in places like Egypt, Ethiopia, and southern India, but those are kind of the exceptions to the rule. During this time, though, Christianity faced some major challenges. It was deeply divided between Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox traditions. It had lost the Holy Lands in the Crusades centuries before. The Ottoman Empire had captured Constantinople in 1453, and Ottoman armies had threatened Vienna twice, once in 1529 and once in 1683. So in other words, Christianity in the year 1500 was defensive, fragmented, under pressure, and not triumphant. And then we have something else happen within the Christian faith. We have the Protestant Reformation. If you don't know what the word Protestant means, because maybe you don't practice Christianity, or you've never heard that word before, even if you are a Christian, break the word apart. Take the A and T off, and what do you have? You have protest. What they're protesting is the Catholic Church as it is. And this is where we start to see the fragmentation of the Catholic Church, and we start to get these other Christian denominations outside of Catholicism, like Lutheranism, our Calvinists, our Methodists. Later on, it's going to be our Baptists, our Church of Gods, our Church of Christ. We have all these different denominations that still call themselves Christian along, with the Catholic Church, the first Christian church. So this situation is going to really change dramatically in 1517, and that's such an important date. That is when Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights activist, but this is the Martin Luther, a scholar, a monk, a member of the Catholic Church. He challenged the authority of that church. And his objections were not just about corruption or indulgences. So at their core, they questioned who had authority over salvation. Was salvation only in the hands of the priests and the popes, or could individuals seek it directly through faith? And this challenge exploded into the Protestant Reformation, which fractured Western Christendom. So how did it spread so quickly, though? Well, one of those things is the invention of the printing press. So we have the Chinese, who we thank for like the blocks, that allowed us to do the printing press. It allowed, because they could print material so quickly and get it out there so rapidly, circulate it rapidly, that allowed those ideas to circulate too. Monarchs also used Protestantism to justify independence from Rome, right? You would have to go ask the Pope before you could do anything. Now it's like, I don't have to ask the Pope, I can just ask myself because I'm the king. And the growing middle class also embraced a religion that emphasized literacy and personal faith. One thing that Martin Luther did is he wrote in the vernacular. He wrote in the language that the people could understand. He translated the Bible into like the German dialect. However, the Reformation did not create equality, right? So what we see is women were often drawn to Protestantism, but convents were closed. Only groups like Quakers gave women formal religious authority. And education for women increased, but largely to reinforce roles as wives and as mothers. And this religious division made Europe more violent, fueling conflicts like the French Wars of Religion, the 30 Years' War, which devastated Central Europe. So in response to that, the Catholic Church launched what's known as the Counter-Reformation, reforming abuses while reaffirming their core doctrines. Scroll down a little bit for you. And one lasting impact of the Reformation was skepticism towards that authority, a habit of questioning tradition that would later shape scientific and political thought, right? And we see a lot of that questioning of authority today, especially in our political climate of 2026, right? And in the future too. So let's talk about how that Christianity and how that Protestant Reformation, now we have like not only Catholicism, but you also have Protestantism being spread. So how did that all come to be? Well, in the Americas, Christianity, right here, spread rapidly, but under devastating circumstances. So the indigenous population collapsed due to disease. There's a lot of military conquest, and there's also forced resettlement. So by 1700, most indigenous peoples in Spanish America had been baptized. But conversion did not mean cultural erasure. Instead, what they do is they blended the religion. And we've seen this, right? We've seen when Christianity took hold, if you know anything about like the history of Christianity, we see them mixing pagan holidays and pagan gods into Christian religion. That had been going on for eons before this. So what we see is this blending of indigenous sacred sites that's going to remain very important. Saints are going to replace older indigenous gods. Rituals survived under this Christian symbolism, and local leaders continued religious authority, but just in new forms. And this blending, that is what we call religious syncretism, and it defined Christianity in the Americas. So let's go down just a little bit and let's look at China and the Jesuits. China presented a very different challenge. Jesuit missionaries respected Chinese culture and targeted elite scholars. They emphasized parallels between like Confucianism and Christianity rather than demanding conversion. So despite centuries of effort, though, Christianity remained very marginal. So Chinese culture was confident, it was self-sufficient. Christianity demanded like this exclusive loyalty. And those missionaries, they just remained outsiders. And when the Catholic Church rejected Jesuit accommodation, many missionaries were expelled. And Christianity never rooted itself deeply in China like it's going to in the Americas. So this persistence and change beyond Europe, this African diaspora religions. So enslaved Africans carried religious traditions across the Atlantic, and despite European suppression, African beliefs blended with Christianity, creating other traditions like voodoo, also featuring spirit possession, ritual dance, and ancestral reverence. We also have Islam. Islam continued spreading through trade, through teaching, through scholars and holy men. Local practices often blended with Islam. And then the most famous reform movement, Wahhabism. And this reform movement is sought to purify Islamic beliefs and eliminate practices that were seen as corrupt. We also have China and India are going to experience religious change without rupture. So in China, Confucianism remained dominant, and new ideas emphasize moral intuition and accessibility. And then you also have people who argued anyone could live virtuously without an elite education. Kind of the same thing that we see happening in Christianity. Like, we're questioning old ways and really looking at ways for common people to have salvation and to have it in their own hands, or to get, just higher above, to reach the state of enlightenment, which we'll talk about that later on. And in India, the Bhakti movement emphasized personal devotion and emotion. It appealed strongly to women. It blurred lines between Hinduism and Islam. And Sikhism emerged, blending both traditions while rejecting caste and promoting equality. So unlike Europe, these societies reworked tradition rather than overthrowing it. And between the 1500s and early 1700s, Europeans developed a new way of thinking, which you're going to look and read about the scientific revolution. Kind of what changed? Well, knowledge based on observation and experimentation and mathematics, things that we can now explain. But there is a conflict with religion, which the book does get into. And that conflict, you'll read more about it. And sometimes that conflict is still there today, but you'll read how they were the conflict was very real, right? It's a bunch of witches and heresy, and we've kind of changed our thinking over time with that. Also, scientific thinking, you're going to notice with the Enlightenment thinking, it spread beyond laboratories. They applied it to economics, policy, and society. It encouraged ideas of right, progress, and reform. And also in politics, especially, you'll hear the word or the person John Locke thrown around a lot. But there are others beyond John Locke, and your book gives a little bit of insight into those others. And with this Enlightenment, though, women were often excluded from equality. Science was sometimes used to justify racism and inequality. And outside Europe, societies selectively adopted scientific ideas. So China focused on astronomy and mapping. Japan studied anatomy through Dutch text. And the Ottoman Empire prioritized practical knowledge. So you'll kind of see how in this chapter, how each area of the world kind of takes on religion and either blends it or rejects it. You'll also see how scientific thinking and the Enlightenment is going to influence these cultures and these belief systems, these long-held belief systems, and how they're going to react to that, and sometimes in a hostile way. So make sure you read through the chapter and do the learning curve, and then complete the primary assignments, primary reading assignments, and kind of the then and now, just to get you more familiar and kind of in the mindset of the people that were living between the years 1450 and 1750.